Dexter, Andrew Conley. On the evening of November 28, 2009, a 17-year-old honor student in Rising Sun, Indiana, strangled his 10-year-old brother to death in their kitchen while their parents were at work. He then drove to his girlfriend's house, gave her a promise ring, and watched a movie. His brother's body was in the trunk. When he walked into the police station the next night and confessed, the first thing he told investigators was the name of a television show. Andrew Conley, born May 14, 1992, was an A&B student with no criminal record and a former Cub Scout. He had worked at a restaurant owned by his school counselor. Beneath this ordinary exterior, he had a history of self-harm and told police he had fantasized about killing since 8th grade, including cutting someone's throat. His parents, Bridget and Sean Conley, both worked overnight shifts at local casinos, regularly leaving Andrew alone with his younger half-brother Connor, a 5th grader described as a good kid who idolized his older brother. On that Saturday evening, with their parents at work, the brothers were home alone. While wrestling, a common activity between them, Andrew locked Connor in a chokehold. Connor's last words were, "Andrew, stop." After Connor passed out and blood appeared from his mouth and nose, Andrew dragged him to the kitchen, put on gloves, and strangled him with both hands for approximately 20 minutes. He then placed a plastic bag over Connor's head, secured it with electrical tape, and dragged the body outside by the feet. He loaded the body into his car's trunk. With his brother's body in the trunk, Andrew drove to his girlfriend's house. His girlfriend later told investigators he seemed happy, more happy than she had seen him in a while. He gave her a promise ring, and they watched the Green Mile together. She had no idea what was in his car, parked just feet away. He then drove to a wooded area and left Connor's body under brush in the dark. The next morning, he stood over his sleeping father with a knife, considering whether to do it again. He decided against it. He joked with his mother when she got home from work, asked his father for condoms, and spent the day watching football as though nothing had happened. The family was beginning to wonder where Connor was. That evening, after confessing to 2 friends who urged him to turn himself in, he walked into the Rising Sun Police Department and told them everything. Within the first hour of interrogation, Conley told police, "I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called Dexter. I feel like him because he's a serial killer of bad people. But I just feel like him." Weeks before, he told his girlfriend he wanted to be just like the fictional serial killer Dexter Morgan, while walking the very trail where Connor's body was later found. He compared his urge to kill to when people are hungry and there is a hamburger sitting there and they knew they had to have it. How does a 17-year-old give his girlfriend a ring with his brother's body in the trunk of his car and seem happier than she had ever seen him? Charged as an adult, Conley pleaded guilty on September 13, 2010, the day trial was set to begin, without a plea agreement. After a 5-day sentencing hearing with 12 witnesses and 155 exhibits, Judge James D. Humphrey sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called Conley's remorse superficial and not sincere. Prosecutor Aaron Negengard declared, "Sometimes people are just evil. This is an evil child." The Indiana Supreme Court affirmed the sentence in a 3-2 decision on July 31, 2012. A post-conviction petition was denied in December 2019. The Indiana Court of Appeals reversed that denial in February 2021, ordering resentencing, but the Indiana Supreme Court reversed again on March 23. 2022, unanimously affirming the sentence. Conley remains incarcerated at Pendleton Correctional Facility, Indiana, now approximately 33 years old, with no further legal avenues publicly reported. A television character gave a teenager permission to act on urges he had been hiding for years. But in the next case, a television show did not inspire a method. It created an obsession with a real person. The Voice, Kevin Loibl. On the evening of June 10, 2016, a 22-year-old singer finished performing at the Plaza Live concert venue in Orlando, Florida, and walked to her merchandise table for a meet and greet with fans. When the next person in line stepped forward and she opened her arms to greet him, he pulled out a handgun and fired 5 shots at point-blank range. He had been planning this moment for over a year. He had changed his entire appearance, trying to become someone she would notice. She had no idea who he was. Christina Grimmie was born March 12, 1994, and was a singer from New Jersey who finished 3rd on Season 6 of NBC's The Voice in 2014 under coach Adam Levine. She had built a massive following on YouTube before the show and continued performing and recording music afterward. Adam Levine called her a gifted talent that comes along so rarely. On the night of her death, she had just performed with the band Before You Exit. Kevin James Loibl, born March 10, 1989, was a 27-year-old Best Buy employee from St. Petersburg, Florida. He lived like a hermit, covering his bedroom windows with aluminum foil and heavy curtains. His only friend, co-worker Corey Dennington, described himself as Loibl's only friend in the world. Police had been called to his home twice previously. In 2013, he broke his father's fiancée's wrist during an argument. He had no diagnosed mental illness. Beginning around 2015, Loibl became fixated on Grimmie. He spent most of his waking hours streaming her videos and scrolling her social media. He called her his soulmate and believed they were destined to be together. To transform himself into someone she might notice, he underwent LASIK surgery, hair transplants, teeth whitening, lost 50 pounds on a vegan diet, and got his learner's permit so he could drive to her performances. He completely reinvented his appearance for a woman who had no idea he existed. When photos surfaced of Grimmie with a producer, co-workers noted Loibl became furious, suggesting what investigators later described as an "if I can't have her, no one can" mindset. Dennington brought the obsession to their supervisor's attention, but nothing was done about it. What happens when someone rewrites their entire identity around a person they have never met? On the day of the concert, Loibl purchased a $15 ticket in advance, legally bought 2 Glock handguns, destroyed his computer's hard drive the day before to eliminate any trace of his online activity, and took a taxi from St. Petersburg to Orlando, a trip of over 100 miles. He arrived at the Plaza Live with a backpack and waited in line like every other fan. At approximately 10:24 p.m., when his turn came and Grimmie opened her arms to hug him the way she greeted everyone, Loibl pulled out a handgun and fired 5 shots, hitting her twice in the chest and once in the head. Her brother Marcus Grimmie, who had been standing nearby, immediately tackled Loibl to the ground. Loibl broke free, backed against a wall, and shot himself, dying instantly. Grimmie was rushed to a local hospital, but died in the early morning hours of June 11th. She was 22 years old. Police found 2 handguns, 2 loaded magazines, a hunting knife, and earplugs on his body. 5 days before, he had told Dennington, "I love you, brother," and said he was tired and ready to ascend. Police concluded probable cause for first-degree murder would have existed had Leubel survived. Grimmie's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against AEG Live, the venue, and the security company, alleging inadequate security. The venue had no metal detectors and no bag checks. Anyone could walk in carrying anything. The Christina Grimmie Foundation, launched in 2017, has distributed nearly $600,000 to over 200 families affected by gun-related incidents. The case occurred less than 30 hours before the Pulse nightclub tragedy, 4 miles away, meaning Orlando experienced 2 mass casualty events in a single weekend. A television competition created a star, and a viewer rewrote his entire life around her. But in the next case, a television show did not just create an obsession, it humiliated someone on national television, and the person who did it killed her the same day the episode aired. The Jerry Springer Show, Ralph Panitz. On July 24, 2000, a man sat in a bar in Sarasota, Florida, watching himself on television. The episode of The Jerry Springer Show that was airing had been taped 2 months earlier. In it, he and his new wife had mocked and humiliated his ex-wife in front of a studio audience. That same morning, his ex-wife had gone to court and obtained a restraining order against him, telling the judge he was frequently threatening and had chased her with a knife. By the end of the night, she was dead. Nancy Campbell Panitz, 52, had met Ralph Panitz, a German-born house painter approximately 40 years old, through AOL chat rooms. He was 12 years younger than Nancy. He relocated from Germany to the United States after they began dating online, and they married. The marriage lasted only 15 months before their divorce in February 1999. Panitz held a black belt in karate and had a documented history of harming Nancy. Despite the divorce, he continued to periodically stay at her home. He secretly married a new partner, Eleanor, in March 2000, while still coming and going from Nancy's house. In May 2000, all 3 were flown to Chicago to tape an episode titled Secret Mistresses Confronted. Nancy believed the show was helping her reconcile with Ralph, whom she thought had been deported back to Germany. Instead, Ralph brought Eleanor onto the stage, and the couple ridiculed Nancy in front of the studio audience and cameras. Nancy was called fat and old, while the crowd jeered and laughed. When asked why he had been intimate with Nancy the night before taping, Ralph said, "I thought she might be humiliated enough to realize it was over." Nancy, humiliated in front of millions of future viewers, quietly walked off stage saying, "That's fine, bye." The episode aired on July 24, 2000. That same morning, Nancy appeared in court and obtained a restraining order against Ralph, telling the judge, "He's frequently violent. He had chased me with a knife and made threats about taking my life." She was trying to protect herself. The law was now on her side. But a piece of paper could not stop what happened next. That evening, Ralph watched the episode at a bar, growing increasingly agitated as he watched himself on screen, reportedly telling someone, "I am going to kill her." He then drove to Nancy's home and beat and strangled her to death. Nancy's face was so badly disfigured that a deputy who had seen her earlier that same day in court could not identify her. Police found 18 bloody footprints matching Ralph's shoes at the scene and his DNA under Nancy's fingernails, evidence she fought for her life. How does a television show fly 3 people to Chicago, humiliate one of them on camera, and then send them all back to the same town? After briefly fleeing toward Canada, Panitz surrendered to authorities in Florida. At a 10-day trial in March 2002, celebrity defense attorney Jeffrey Feger known for representing Dr. Jack Kevorkian, argued Nancy died of a heart attack during a confrontation with someone else entirely. Prosecutors called Panitz a master manipulator turned murderer and presented the 18 footprints, the DNA evidence, and testimony from neighbors who heard the confrontation. The jury convicted him of second-degree murder and violating a protective order. Circuit Judge Nancy Donnellan sentenced him to life in prison without parole, the maximum allowed, holding up a photograph of Nancy's face to the courtroom camera and declaring, "Shame on you," to the Jerry Springer Show. Jerry Springer called it a very, very sad event, but it has nothing to do with the show. He died on April 27, 2023, at age 79. Panitz remains incarcerated at Marion Correctional Institution in Marion County, Florida, approximately age 65. The case was revisited in the Netflix docu-series Jerry Springer, Fights, Camera, Action in January 2025. A show built on public humiliation sent two people back to the same town, and one of them did not survive the night the episode aired. But in the next case, the connection to television was not about obsession or humiliation. It was about imitation. Dexter, Stephen Miles. On the afternoon of January 24, 2014, a 16-year-old student in Oxted, Surrey, England, walked home from school with his 17-year-old girlfriend. They went to his family flat on Amy Road. No one else was home. Within an hour, she was dead, and he had begun dismembering her body using tools from his father's tree surgery business. Weeks earlier, he had texted her, "You will see a lot of similarities in the personality of Dexter and myself." Elizabeth Thomas, 17, was a fellow student at Oxted School. Friends described her as really pretty, really funny, and really kind. She had defended Miles when others at school called him different, and stood by him when many people would not have. She believed she saw something in him worth caring about. The judge later noted that Miles chillingly described her as his project. The girl who had shown him the most kindness became the person he chose to harm. Stephen Miles was diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder and had been referred to NHS Mental Health Services in April 2012 for self-harming behavior and claiming to hear voices from a man called Ed. He was discharged from mental health services in October 2013, less than 3 months before the act, having been judged to have made good progress. Psychiatric experts later determined he was not schizophrenic. Ed was assessed as a manifestation of anxiety, not psychosis. Miles lived a nocturnal life with a fixation on horror and the macabre, favoring films like Psycho and Fight Club, and reading Hannibal Lecter novels. A previous girlfriend told police he had once described in detail how he planned to kill someone and briefly attempted to strangle her during their relationship. The warning signs were there long before January 2014. He was obsessed with the Showtime series Dexter and sought to replicate the fictional serial killer's methods in real life. He studied the characters, techniques, and rituals. His defense counsel, Lewis Power QC, stated, "This was a truly gruesome killing ripped from the pages of a hit TV script." On January 24th, at approximately 2:35 p.m., Miles and Elizabeth walked from school to his flat. With no family members home, he launched what prosecutors called a horrific attack in his bedroom, stabbing Elizabeth multiple times in the back and head. A kitchen knife was found embedded in her skull. After she died, he dismembered her body using saws and tools from his father's tree surgery business, severing both legs and one arm. He wrapped the limbs in cling film and bin bags, covered the torso with a plastic garden sheet, and attempted to clean up the flat. A note was found reading, "Bag, bin bag, plastic sheet, army knife, cling film. He had written out a list of supplies in advance. This was not spontaneous. At approximately 3:45 p.m., barely an hour later, his sister returned to the flat. Miles told her, "Ed made me do something bad." Police arrived to a scene that one officer described as something they had never encountered before. The methodical nature of the dismemberment, the list of supplies, and the text messages comparing himself to Dexter painted a picture of someone who had been thinking about this for a long time and finally acted on it. How does a 16-year-old text his girlfriend that he is just like a fictional serial killer, and she still walks home with him the next week? Miles pleaded guilty on September 9, 2014, at Guilford Crown Court. On October 2, 2014, Judge Christopher Critchlow sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years, noting he would have imposed a whole life tariff had Miles been an adult. Miles showed no emotion during sentencing. He is currently imprisoned in the UK system and will not be eligible for parole consideration until approximately 2039, when he will be 41 years old. No appeals or sentence reductions have been publicly reported. A girl defended the boy everyone else called different, and he killed her using the methods of a character he told her he identified with. But in the next case, the television connection was not about a character at all. It was about a technique. Breaking Bad. Stefano Brizzi. On April 7, 2016, neighbors in a block of flats near the Tate Modern in Southwark, London, called police about a stench coming from one of the units. When officers arrived, the man who opened the door was wearing pink briefs and aviator sunglasses. He greeted them and immediately said, "I have tried to dissolve the body. I have killed a police officer. Satan told me to." What they found inside the flat was one of the most disturbing crime scenes in modern British history. And the man responsible told them exactly which television show had taught him what to do. Stefano Brizzi, born June 26, 1966, in Tuscany, Italy, was a former Morgan Stanley computer programmer who once earned approximately £70,000 per year. He held 2 degrees from the University of Florence. Diagnosed with HIV and hepatitis C in 2008, he became addicted to crystal methamphetamine in 2013 through London's chemsex scene, referring to the substance as Nutella. His addiction forced him to leave Morgan Stanley in February 2015. He became a self-described Satanist. A copy of the Satanic Bible, black candles, a knife, and handwritten notes addressed to the devil were found throughout his Southwark flat. P.C. Gordon Semple, 59, was a Metropolitan Police Constable from Inverness, Scotland, who had served since 1983. He was in a 25-year relationship with his partner Gary Meeks. He was a respected officer with decades of service. On April 1, 2016, Brizzi and Semple connected through Grindr and arranged to meet at Brizzi's flat. During an encounter involving crystal meth, Brizzi strangled Semple with a dog leash. What he did next is what connected this case directly to television. He attempted to dissolve the body in his bathtub using sodium hydroxide and hydrofluoric acid, directly replicating a scene from Breaking Bad, in which characters dissolve a body in acid. Prosecutor Crispin Eilert QC told the Old Bailey that Brizzi had lived out an episode of the series. Brizzi used 3 different saws to dismember the body over several days. He cooked parts of it in his oven, and pools of human fat were found throughout the kitchen. He dumped remains into the River Thames, calling it a funeral on the River Thames. A foot was later recovered near Bermondsey Wall by a member of the public. Forensic examination of a rib bone confirmed bite marks, meaning he had attempted to consume human flesh. The flat was a scene of complete devastation, with evidence of what had taken place in nearly every room. The smell had been so overpowering that neighbors 6 days later could no longer ignore it and called authorities. How does a former investment bank programmer end up dissolving a police officer in his bathtub because a television character did something similar? If you have made it this far and enjoy deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss one of these. At the Old Bailey, Brizzy denied the charge and claimed Semple's death was accidental, a consensual encounter that went wrong. He showed no remorse during the proceedings. On November 13, 2016, a jury convicted him by a majority of 10-2 after more than 30 hours of deliberation. Judge Nicholas Hilliard QC sentenced him to life with a minimum of 24 years. P.C. Semple's partner, Gary Meeks, sat through every day of the trial. Less than 2 months later, on February 5, 2017, Brizzy was found hanging from a light fitting in his cell at HMP Belmarsh. He had been taken off self-harm watch just weeks earlier. He was pronounced dead at 10:10 a.m., aged 50. A letter found on his bed read, "I die in peace." An inquest returned a verdict of self-inflicted death. A television show taught a man a technique, and a police officer paid the price. But in the next case, the obsession was not with a method or a character. It was with the actress herself. My Sister Sam, Robert Bardo. On the morning of July 18, 1989, a 21-year-old actress answered the door of her apartment in the Fairfax district of Los Angeles. She was wearing a black bathrobe and may have been expecting a script delivery for an audition she had later that day. For the role of Mary Corleone in The Godfather Part 3, the man at her door had been stalking her for 3 years. He had obtained her home address from the California DM5 for $1. When she opened the door, he pulled a .357 Magnum from a paper bag and shot her once in the chest. She screamed, "Why? Why?" as she collapsed. She was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center approximately 30 minutes later. Rebecca Schaefer, born November 6, 1967, in Eugene, Oregon, was best known for playing Patty Russell on the CBS sitcom My Sister Sam from 1986 to 1988, alongside Pam Dauber. She had appeared on the cover of 17 magazine and had a small role in Woody Allen's Radio Days. She was 21 years old, and her career was accelerating. Robert John Bardo, born January 2, 1970, at Edwards Air Force Base, California, was the youngest of 7 children in a military family that settled in Tucson, Arizona. He was harmed by at least one sibling during childhood, threatened to end his own life, and was placed in foster care. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder, he was institutionalized at 15 for emotional difficulties, and later diagnosed with schizophrenia. Despite earning straight A's, he dropped out in 9th grade and worked as a janitor. Before fixating on Schaefer, he had stalked child peace activist Samantha Smith at 13, traveling by bus from Tucson to Maine to find her. Bardo first saw Schaefer in a 1986 commercial for My Sister Sam and became obsessed. He wrote numerous fan letters. Schaefer responded to one, calling it one of the nicest she had received and signing it "With love from Rebecca," which inflamed his fixation. He built a bedroom shrine with posters and episode recordings. In June 1987, he traveled to Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank with a teddy bear and flowers. Demanding to see her, security turned him away. He returned a month later carrying a knife. He confessed to his sister, "If I can't have her, nobody will." After seeing Schaefer in a film love scene in 1989, he called her another Hollywood whore. How did he find her home address? Inspired by the man who had attacked actress Teresa Saldana in 1982, Bardo hired a Tucson detective agency, paying $250 to obtain Schaefer's address from California DMV records, which at the time sold any registered motorist's address for as little as $1. His brother Edward purchased a .357 Magnum Ruger revolver for him after Bardo was turned away from a gun store due to his mental health history. On the morning of July 18th, Bardo arrived at her apartment after an overnight Greyhound trip from Tucson. He first visited her doorstep carrying a letter. They had a brief, polite conversation, and she asked him not to return. He went to a nearby diner, then came back approximately an hour later. When Schaefer came to the door a second time, Bardo pulled the weapon from a paper bag and fired. He fled to Tucson, where the next day he was spotted wandering in traffic on Interstate 10, yelling that he had killed Rebecca Schaefer. Prosecutor Marcia Clark, later famous for the O.J. Simpson trial, tried the case as a bench trial. On October 29, 1991, Bardo was convicted of first-degree murder with a special circumstance of lying in wait and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Schaefer's death directly led to two landmark laws: California's anti-stalking statute, Penal Code 646.9, the first in the nation, passed in 1990, and the Federal Driver's Privacy Protection Act of 1994, prohibiting DMVs from disclosing home addresses. Bardo, now 56, is incarcerated at a venal state prison in California. In 2007, he was stabbed 11 times by another inmate and survived. He told ABC News, "She was irreplaceable. I think about her every day because she should be here." A $1 DMV record, a 3-year obsession, and 2 laws that carry a victim's legacy. But in the next case, a television show did not just create a fan or inspire a method. It created a situation that ended in a shotgun blast 3 days after taping. The Jenny Jones Show. Jonathan Schmitz. On March 9, 1995, a 24-year-old man in Lake Orion, Michigan, drove to a bank, withdrew money, purchased a 12-gauge shotgun, and drove to his neighbor's mobile home. He knocked on the door, asked a single question, and when the man inside smiled, he went back to his car, retrieved the shotgun, walked back in, and fired 2 shots into the man's chest. 3 days earlier, both men had been on a television set in Chicago. One of them had just found out, in front of a studio audience, that the other had a romantic interest in him. The episode never aired. Jonathan Schmitz, born circa 1970, was a 24-year-old pizza delivery driver and amateur drummer from Lake Orion, Michigan. He suffered from undiagnosed bipolar disorder and Graves' disease, a thyroid disorder. His father, Alan, testified that Jonathan had previously attempted to end his own life. The family was described as conservative. Scott Amador, born January 26, 1963 in Pittsburgh, was a 32-year-old bartender at Club Flamingo, a gay club in Pontiac, Michigan. A former U.S. Army specialist with an honorable discharge, Amador was an acquaintance of Schmitz from Lake Orion. On March 6, 1995, Schmitz was flown to Chicago to tape an episode of The Jenny Jones Show titled Same-Sex Secret Crushes. He did not know who his secret admirer would be or what the segment was about. Producers had told him only that someone had a crush on him. Amador appeared on stage and, at host Jenny Jones's encouragement, described fantasies about Schmitz involving champagne, whipped cream, and strawberries. Schmitz, visibly uncomfortable and caught completely off guard, laughed nervously, and stated he was definitely heterosexual. He later told police the experience left him feeling humiliated and blindsided. The episode was never broadcast in its original run. It was shelved by the network and only shown publicly during subsequent court proceedings in 1996. 3 days after the taping, on March 9th, Amador left a suggestive note on Schmitz's doorstep. Something in Schmitz broke. He withdrew money from a bank, purchased the shotgun, drove to Amador's mobile home, and asked if Amador had left the note. When Amador reportedly smiled, Schmitz returned to his car, retrieved the shotgun, re-entered, and fired 2 shots into Amador's chest. Roommate Gary Brady witnessed the entire shooting from inside the home. Schmitz drove away, pulled over, called 911, and confessed to what he had just done. What responsibility does a television show bear when it flies someone to a studio, surprises them with information they are not prepared for, and sends them home? Charged with first-degree murder, Schmitz was tried in 1996. His defense employed a diminished capacity argument, citing his bipolar disorder and the show's ambush format. On November 13, 1996, the jury returned a verdict of second-degree murder with a sentence of 25 to 50 years, plus 2 years for the firearm charge. The Michigan Court of Appeals reversed the conviction on procedural grounds, and a 1999 retrial produced the same verdict and sentence. Attorney Jeffrey Feger sued Warner Brothers and The Jenny Jones Show on behalf of the Amador family, arguing, "They solicited a victim, they picked the murderer, and they provided the motive. They did everything except actually pull the trigger." In May 1999, a jury awarded $29.3 million to the Amador family. However, the Michigan Court of Appeals reversed the verdict 2-1, ruling the outcome was unforeseeable. The Michigan Supreme Court declined review. The family never received any money. Schmitz was released on parole on August 22, 2017, at age 47, after serving 22 years. He returned to Michigan and has maintained an extremely low profile with no social media, no interviews, and no public statements. Scott Amador's brother Frank Jr. stated, "I wanted assurance that the decision was not based on just good behavior in prison. I'd like to know that he learned something." A show that never aired, a $29 million verdict that was overturned, and a man who served 22 years for something a television producer set in motion. But the final case on this list is perhaps the most unsettling of all, because the person who died was not the target of a fan or a jealous ex. He was the target of the show itself. To Catch a Predator, Louis Conrad Jr. On the morning of November 5, 2006, a television host, a camera crew, and a team of police officers arrived at a house in Terrell, Texas, belonging to a 56-year-old man who had been exchanging explicit messages online with someone he believed was a 13-year-old boy. The man was not a stranger or a drifter. He was the former district attorney of Kaufman County, Texas, a position he held for 22 years. When the SWAT team breached his front door that afternoon, they found him in a hallway holding a handgun. He said, "I'm not going to hurt anyone." Then he shot himself. He was pronounced dead approximately an hour later. Louis William Bill Conrad Jr., born January 30th, 1950 in Terrell, Texas, was a veteran prosecutor who served as District Attorney of Kaufman County for 22 years, from 1980 to 2002. After an unsuccessful campaign for a judgeship, he entered private practice and by 2006 was the Chief Felony Assistant District Attorney of Rockwall County. He held a law degree from Texas Tech University, Colleagues described him as a skilled prosecutor with a near-photographic memory for the law. He was unmarried and still living in the family home in Terrell. In November 2006, NBC's Dateline and the watchdog group Perverted Justice set up their 9th to catch a predator sting in Murphy, Texas, a Dallas suburb. For weeks, a Perverted Justice volunteer posing as a boy named Luke had been exchanging explicit messages online with a user called Inexaz20, later identified as Conrad, who posed as a 19-year-old college student. On November 4th, an NBC voice actor made telephone contact with Conrad while posing as the decoy, and Conrad provided identifying personal information. When Conrad stopped communicating and failed to travel to the Murphy bait house, Dateline host Chris Hansen made an unprecedented decision. If he won't come to us, we'll go to him. At 12:30 a.m. on November 5th, Hansen asked Murphy Police Chief Billy Myrick to secure arrest and search warrants. The warrants were rushed. The search warrant contained the wrong city, county, and date. On the morning of November 5th, Hansen and his camera crew arrived at Conrad's neighborhood. Murphy and Terrell police arrived later, with fewer officers than camera operators on the scene. Officers knocked. Conrad did not answer. At approximately 2:40 p.m., SWAT was called. A 7-man team breached the door and found Conrad in a hallway holding a Browning .380 handgun. He said he was not going to hurt anyone, then turned the weapon on himself. He was pronounced dead at a Dallas hospital approximately an hour later. What happens when a reality television show decides to go to someone's home instead of waiting for them to come to the bait house? In July 2007, Conrad's sister Patricia filed a $105 million lawsuit against NBC Universal, alleging wrongful death, racketeering, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She told the Murphy City Council that police had acted as a judge, jury, and executioner that was encouraged by an out-of-control reality show. U.S. District Judge Denny Chin denied NBC's motion to dismiss, writing that NBC placed itself squarely in the middle of a police operation, pushing the police to engage in tactics that were unnecessary and unwise, solely to generate more dramatic footage. On June 24, 2008, the parties announced a settlement with undisclosed terms. NBC did not admit wrongdoing. Collin County D.A. John Roach declined to prosecute 23 of the 24 men caught in the Murphy sting, citing jurisdictional problems and the watchdog group's refusal to cooperate with prosecutors. Murphy's city manager and police chief were both subsequently fired. To Catch a Predator never conducted another sting. Its final new episode aired in December 2007, and the show was officially canceled in 2008. A Dateline producer had presciently told Radar magazine months before the Murphy sting, "One of these guys is going to go home and shoot himself in the head." Chris Hansen stated in a 2021 interview, "I don't feel responsible for it. I sleep well at night." This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.